Welcome to the Women Changing the World podcast, a podcast on a mission to bring you some of the most amazing women I know who are doing incredible things to generally make the world a better place. From corporate sustainability to straight up magic and everything in between, you'll meet the real life humans who are birthing the new. I'm your host, Liz Best, and I'm here to amplify the stories and voices of women who are changing the world. I am seriously so excited for today's conversation with Sam Hartsock. Sam is a friend, longtime collaborator, GCC member, and all-around awesome human who I admire and appreciate so much. We talked about Sam's journey and all the twists and turns to co-founding QB Consulting and how nature inspired the firm's name, the early years of QB and the skill that helped them be successful early on, what it means to take a human-centered approach to ESG strategy and consulting, Sam's sustainable fashion experience as an activist, creator of Remake's Ambassador Program, consumer, and consultant, how QB thinks about which clients and projects it takes on, climate resilience and local climate action, and how companies can center stakeholders in activating on these topics in a meaningful way, navigating early motherhood and entrepreneurship at the same time, how community can spark confidence, what leadership means to Sam today, and so much more. A little bit more about Sam. She is a self-proclaimed generalist, interdisciplinary thinker, and strategist who transformed her curiosity, love of learning, and commitment to protecting our natural resources into a thriving career and impact. As co-founder of QB, a woman-owned ESG consulting firm, she is on a mission to build resilient organizations that put people first. Her mantra is hit pause and throw out the template. When she's not leading double materiality assessments, demystifying ESG jargon, or designing community-centered climate resilience strategies for Fortune 500s, you'll find Sam hosting clothing swaps, advocating for equity and sustainability in fashion with Remake, or momming hard to 2 toddlers. Let's get started. I am seriously so excited to be here today with Sam Hartsock, co-founder of QB Consulting, and so much more. Sam, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Liz. And I am equally excited to be here and slightly terrified, facing some personal challenges by speaking on my first podcast today. But, you're known for making one of the safest, fun, welcoming communities. So I was happy to show up.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. It's always such an honor when I get to be someone's first podcast interview because I feel like from where I sit, I'm like, oh, I have no doubt that there are many, many more to come. So thank you for trusting me and for being here. Maybe before we jump in, would you mind just briefly introducing yourself to our listeners?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Sam Hartsock. I am one of the co-founders of QB Consulting. QB is an ESG strategy and communications firm. I am based in Burlingame, which is just south of San Francisco, and I live here with my partner, 2 toddler boys, and my 14-year-old puppy.
Oh, yay. I love it. Thank you for that intro and love you giving us context on where in the world you are too with Ginger and all your boys. I know a lot of people who may be listening may have seen or heard about or be familiar with QB Consulting. I'm curious if maybe we could start with a little bit more about what QB is, because I know that's your other baby that you've brought into this world.
Yeah, been bringing a lot of babies into the world over the past 7 years for sure. QB, we started in 2017. So this is our seventh year to be in business, which has just been amazing and hard and beautiful and powerful in so many ways. QB itself stands for Queen Bee. When me and Noemi were both, and Noemi's my co-founder, when me and Noemi were both starting QB, we wanted something that represented us as women, that was fun, that was playful, but also, if you threw our RFP down on a stack next to BSR, Deloitte, EY, KPMG, any other acronym consulting firm out there, no one would necessarily blink an eye. And so that's been why we chose QB. And to us, it also represents the Beehive, which is a female-led community in nature. And that's certainly what we're out and stand for. And then the mission of QB is to, or really our vision in QB is to create a world where organizations prioritize inclusive, diverse communities and invest in climate resilience. And that's been our vision for QB since the day we started. And our mission is to create organizations that are resilient and really putting people first. So a drive to start QB was to say, hey, we're all going into this place to prioritize people, to make the planet a better place for people to live, to make working a better place for people to work, to take care of the people in our supply chains, the people who live next to where manufacturing happens. And so being human-centered, putting people first has always been a lot of how we advise. And then the doing part of what we actually do is a lot of core corporate sustainability work. So thinking about double materiality assessments, helping organizations understand what environmental, social governance topics they should be prioritizing and focusing on from a strategic perspective and planning to also a reporting and storytelling perspective. So we help companies do their annual reports, think about their disclosures, as well as how do they want to show up and talk about the work that they're doing. And then a little bit of all of that in between. So helping companies implement a lot of their climate action plans, do their carbon accounting, climate risk assessments, you name it. For a small firm, we're a pretty full service shop, which has been nice.
Oh, that's so cool. I love hearing you talk about QB. And for anyone listening who doesn't know, I've actually had the joy and the privilege of partnering with QB over the past almost 5 years, which is wild. But I'm just such a big fan of the fresh take that you have brought to this space. I think so interesting. I think there's more and more every day, but how few firms, especially when you first got started, were out there that really felt like the kind of work and the kind of change that we want to see in the world. And the fact that you started something that's so human-centered, remote first, and just brought such a fresh perspective to the work before the pandemic, before so many things, I just so appreciate and admire. And I really love your story, Sam, of why you started the business. And I feel like you've had such a long career of throwing out the template and doing things differently from how they've always been done. And so I'd really love to invite you to share a little bit about how you got to be where you are today. And really the invitation is take up space and tell your story. I know I love hearing it, and our listeners also love hearing the twists and turns that have brought you to this moment.
Yeah, I was reflecting on this a lot this year, actually. I think too, being the 7th year of QB and kind of owning a company for 7 years is something I never thought I would do in my life. Nothing I could have ever imagined for myself. So I've also been thinking about, what is the next twist and turn that could come after QB, or is this oddly where I stay my whole career too, which would be a blessing. But yeah, I feel like my career has definitely been not a straight line and has had dips and curves and moving around. What has always struck me, though, is I've kind of followed my passion and what I wanted to do. So in undergrad, I, really wanted to work in fashion, really wanted to be the people working in supply chains, going to China, working in factories, supporting the workers there, helping bring a product to market, being a part of the buying team, any and everything of making something that people loved. I was always really connected to clothing and the stories that clothing told. and how people can pass on clothing if you make something super high quality. So a lot of my sustainability journey is definitely a part of fashion and consumerism and that piece of it. But that was where I was first sitting in terms of just interest in what I thought I would do with my life. And then I got a dream internship like summer of junior year of college at JCPenney's. And I was going to be on their merchandising and action team, which that means essentially you work with a buyer at JCPenney's and they have a planner and an allocator. And then this person is like buying merchandise to sell at JCPenney's. JCPenney's at the time also made their own merchandise as well. And so to me, it was my first look into the belly of the beast of like mass consumerism, mass production. I was not on fashion, not that cool. A bunch of cool students from NYU and New York got put on the fashion lines. I was in cookware and cutlery, which was still fascinating to see how seasonality plays a role and design plays a role, even in how our spatulas show up in our kitchens. But yeah, I just realized, wow, like JCPenney's buys about 5 lines of spatulas and produces another 3 itself, sells those all in its stores. It has multiple stores across the country. And then you have your Macy's and Sears and Targets and Dillard's and Walmart's and Kohl's all doing the exact same thing, selling very much of the same merchandise. So that was my first moment of like, I don't want to be a part of this system. I want my career and the time I spent working to be essentially working against that system, working against something alternative. I think that was also one of my first interactions into systems thinking without having that name for it yet, but just kind of collecting all of these, seeing how all these pieces connected together. Oh, I guess one other anecdote I will say that struck me also for choosing a different path for my career is I had an exit interview with JCPenney's for this internship. And prior to getting to JCPenney's, I had been studying abroad in China. Flew from China, arrived in the US at like 2 a.m., started my internship at 8 a.m. that same day. So it was like very quick transition. So also it was one of the first times I'd really been abroad as well. And so I was just awestruck with my journey. And I think I definitely talked about it a lot. But one of the HR people there as part of the exit interview started asking me like, oh, are you excited about the Beijing Olympics that were happening that summer? And I was like, yes, of course, talking about all this stuff really enthusiastically. And they followed up with, we wish you were this excited about our internship. And that I was just like struck cold. Like, wait, did you just trick me? Like, what is this experience? Like, you are a 50-year-old man and I am a 19 girl having my first internship. And I just got like baited. So that also really stuck with me in terms of like corporate culture potential as like, man, I don't want to be a part of this from a like culture perspective and what is the impact my work is having on the world perspective. So I left the corporate world forever in some ways and came back to school and got the opportunity to open a fair trade store in Columbia, Missouri, which was amazing because I got to put all these buying skills I had just used to work and started learning about, how fair trade work, artisans, different ways to bring products to market, the ways it was bought. So certainly explored fair trade for a while. I think that's where I started learning a lot about human rights as well and kind of gaining that appetite. Then I was ready to graduate, kind of asking like, what am I going to do with my career? I'm also graduating into the recession. Liz, I feel like you probably did the same.
Yep.
And all the people who were offered jobs at JCPenney's in my same interclass did not get those jobs because they were revoked because of the recession. And so I think a lot of us millennials were kind of just asking like, what do we do next? What are the options? And really choosing an alternative, something different for our career was an option. So I got an internship at Tom's and packed up my bag in Dallas and drove out to California, was ready to never look back. And that was just an amazing experience to be a part of what felt like a social movement at the time, but be a part of one that was like a business trying to actually do good. I mean, today we can look back in hindsight and see how flawed many of that was as well. But for the times in like 2009, it was really groundbreaking and just inspiring people to make a choice that there are alternative options to how we buy, to how we spend our money as well. And then, I did Tom's for a couple months, but they were done hiring 20 somethings with no real actual experience or subject matter expertise. So they were like, yeah, this is fun, Sam. Thank you. So I tried for another couple months to stay out in LA. I got a job at a a family-owned vegan boutique in Santa Monica, and spent the first half of 2010 just skateboarding to work, working part-time, helping them run that store, and starting to do this thing called blogging and learning about Twitter and stuff like that. And then, of course, that was like building no financial stability in my life. So I was still looking for more jobs. Was lucky to find some work out in Austin and moved to Austin later that year. Worked for Handmade Expressions, which it was called at the time, another fair trade company. And there I was given kind of a side project of the CEO. Essentially, he wanted to create a community around his company, or really around fair trade. And the thing I did at Tom's too was build their ambassador program. So I didn't realize it at the time, though I never saw myself as an entrepreneur. I was always internally at a company building something from scratch and being asked to take the blank canvas and like fill it with ideas and structure and plans and targets and goals. And that's something that has definitely served me well at QB too. But yeah, I went out to Handmade Expressions, worked there for a while, and then finally had the realization that, man, trying to work in fashion or some sort of like apparel product and do good does not pay well at all, is not financially sustainable for me as an individual. So I think it was one of those moments where I finally had to pull back a little bit and realize like, okay, I need to be able to like pay for my life, start thinking about my future. What else could I be doing if I scale back? What do I really want to be a part of if it's not in fashion? Because that's not showing up for me right now. And that's where I found change.org, which was amazing. It's a company that, was a social enterprise and really looking to bring technology into nonprofits, bring activism online, educate people broadly about the power of their voice. And it was definitely like a place where a lot of 2008 campaigners went, and just a lot of amazing, beautiful people moving to DC too with these great ideas. And so the energy drew me to move to DC as well. And I ended up working at Change for 5 years. But yeah, I just asked myself the question of, if I'm not working in fashion, what do I want to do and be a part of? And I wanted to be a part of the team that was like driving sustainable revenue so that it as a company could really do the change that it hoped to create. And I kind of harp on those couple really early jobs in this story too, just to inspire those who are listening to the sense of like, going out and finding a job is tough. Really tough and hard. And sometimes it doesn't work out the first time you take a job, or, you're just like trialing, airing it as you go. But I think if you're honed into what your values are, what you're excited about, but also being willing to, pick and choose what is a priority for you as well, I think it helps people figure out what is right for them and what's the best fit. I actually, before I took the Change.org job, I accepted a job at a satellite trade association company because I was ready just to move to DC and hadn't landed Change yet. They hadn't called me back yet. I don't know how I convinced them that I could do this, but they hired me to be an editor at a satellite trade magazine. My role was to like interview CEOs of satellite companies and to, set up their LinkedIn page and Twitter profile, because this is still like 2012 and we're just hiring some young folk to do these online things at the time without any strategy. But luckily, Change.org called, and within a week, I had to put in my notice from the satellite company and let them know that I could no longer work at this role. But I think I like that story in the sense of like, you have to go with your gut and don't feel like you're necessarily owed any company in particular thing as well. But yeah, I worked at Change for about 5 years and then came out to San Francisco to get my MBA in sustainability management, which actually was my next ditch effort to try to work in fashion again. So it's definitely like a dream I've been pursuing for a long time too. My goal was to go to Presidio graduate school and either work inside of Levi's or work at BSR, which is where we met, especially because I knew BSR had a good consumer product goods clients and structure, and was definitely a place I wanted to be a part of. The closer I got to getting an opportunity to work at Levi's or get back into corporate sustainability in terms of fashion, the more I realized that, man, if I want to make an impact and change, working inside a fashion company is not the way to do that at all. And having come work at Change, which was very activist focused and first, I think that told me if this is an industry I care about and making real change in, then I need to keep an activist path in that way. So I gave up my dreams to work in fashion in particular, and kind of, again, stepped back and say, I really enjoy this space of corporate sustainability. I can be a little more sector agnostic. So yeah, it's kind of my career.
Wow. I love it. It's such a great story. And I just so appreciate like the reminder sprinkled in there too. It's one of those things where I think so often when we're in it and we're trying to figure out our path and like something that we really want isn't happening right away, it can feel like so frustrating. And not that it's not so frustrating, but hearing you connect these dots in hindsight, there's like so many threads of work that you did long before starting QB that I'm sure have served you so well since you officially decided to launch and start QB.
Yeah, definitely. It was pretty wild when I look back on it, kind of in the early days of being in grad school, and when you're kind of forced or invited to start companies in a mock way. Then I started building mine in a real way. I realized like, oh, I've been creating and like birthing projects my whole life and kind of like choosing alternative options my whole life, that this is actually one of the most natural things that I could do that I never thought I would do.
Absolutely. Well, and I know that we haven't talked about Remake yet in much detail, but I know that's also been a big part of your journey and that you continue to be super passionate about sustainable fashion. And I know a lot of people who are listening right now care a lot about this too. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your work with Remake and how you came to the conclusion, and you alluded to this a little bit, that your passion can be your activism and doesn't necessarily have to be your full-time job.
Yeah, definitely. Man, I was so lucky to meet Aisha in 2016. So Aisha actually spoke at a conference in 2016 in DC right before I knew I was moving to San Francisco to go to grad school. And I had like begged my VP of sales to like let me go to this conference for professional development and all this jazz, and got to go, which was amazing. And then this woman comes on stage, and it's the only kind of like keynote presentation about fashion in general. So I was already really intrigued. And then she started speaking, and I'm just like, who is this woman speaking to my heart? Like what she's talking about, the organization she's built is everything I've ever wanted to be a part of, which is like, how do you inspire people who look like me to think about their purchasing decisions differently, to consider the worker when they're going and making these purchasing decisions, to advocate for the women in supply chains. And Aisha too had been working in corporate sustainability within the, UN complex. And she herself had that realization of like, working inside corporations, really closely along corporations, isn't the change that fashion needs. Fashion needs like system-wide change that really is going to come at this like international, national, local policy level and at the consumer level, because in the end, brands are going to listen to consumers too. And if they start advocating enough. And so I was like, all right, I know I'm headed to San Francisco. I'm just going to be patient and wait. And I know that me and Aisha will be able to meet. And so I started at Presidio Graduate School, got to meet the amazing Melissa Hook, who she now works at REI. And she introduced me to Aisha. She had actually been working at Levi's too at the time. We met over drinks, and then it was just a beautiful friendship that started to bud. And I was a student who was also like hi, there's this thing that I can do stuff for you for free because I'm a student. They're called capstone projects. Do you want to be a part of that? And she's like, yeah, definitely. So I brought her in to be a part of our like PGS strategy capstone project. And her question was, I'm one person. My team is like a team of 3 right now. How do we scale our impact was her real big question. And how do we do that fast over time? And so where we landed is on building out an ambassador program and say, like, you need people who are excited about Remake, who want to go and champion their friends, be influential in their communities and their schools. Because who people really listen to in terms of habit change are those usually closest to them, as well as like online. And so that was our pitch. And then she said, okay, well, are you going to come on board and build this? And I was like, heck yeah, definitely. And kind of a beautiful thing that happened is while I was getting my MBA at Presidio Graduate School, I was building the ambassador program at Remake and QB at the same time. They both kind of launched in 2017 and my second semester of grad school. And I think that's also what really imprinted on QB nicely too is, yes, we're a corporate sustainability consulting firm, but so much of the influence comes from this activist lens, people first lens, doing this to elevate diverse voices, bring diverse voices to the table so that executives are listening to different people and making decisions, getting information that they're not necessarily always getting and like taking them out of their echo chamber. But yeah, working at Remake was so profoundly game changing for me. One of the most beautiful experiences I've been a part of. I built our ambassador community. It has over 2,000 people a part of it now. In 2021, I unfortunately had to say bye to that baby because I had an actual baby boy that I now had to take care of in my life. And I realized I couldn't have 3 babies at the time, being Remake, QB, and Wyatt, my son. But today I still am a avid donor and ambassador myself. But yeah, if anyone's here listening and interested in fashion and being a human rights advocate and being a climate justice advocate, I really recommend looking into Remake's ambassador program. Also, given the state of the world and the Trump administration that we live in now, I know a lot of people are also searching for community and finding like-minded people. Like, this is an amazing home for that. It's a community that, yeah, will help you create real change, but it's also one where we are educating and teaching each other and having fun and celebrations. So there's usually like mending workshops. Remake just did this amazing like secondhand reuse material fashion show in San Francisco with like the local NPR here. They just also launched a documentary as well on buying. And then there's one on called Hellville as well, which you should go check out on HBO. So they're the place to be if you're interested in fashion.
Oh, so cool. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm curious, like, how has what you learned at Remake and your activism at Remake informed what clients and partners and collaborators you take on as a co-founder at QB?
Yeah, this was a question Noemi and I gave a lot of thought to, and I knew was super important to me when we started QB. Me and Noemi both had an interest in human rights and supply chain. And then my career kind of having been started all in fashion and aspiring to be in fashion, we both made the really hard decision that we were not going to work with CPG brands. I think especially in 2017, what we saw a lot from consumer product goods brands is constant laying off and rehiring of their CSR, social impact, ESG teams that were not resourced, a good bit of like greenwashing across the board. Also from the business perspective, they were usually like the tightest margins and some of the hardest clients to work with, and also who there was a lot of competition for as well. And we're like, do we really want to play where everyone's already playing? That's not what we got started to do. And so, yeah, we made the really hard choice that even though that was our kind of like area of expertise in some way from like a content perspective, that's not where we wanted to focus on. And we had some hard no's along the way, or I guess they weren't that hard, but we certainly had to like flex this and put it to practice. Urban Outfitters came to us and offered us an opportunity to submit for their RFP. But when I looked at their RFP at the time, it was very about environmental and their climate strategy and their carbon emissions. And I was like, well, where do you want us to talk about human rights and social topics as well? And so that was an easy, clear no for us. We also keep the bar of, if we are to work with a fashion company or an apparel company, like it's got to be strategy work first. Like we're not going to come in and just do the talking about whatever you're doing. We're going to come in and at a place of influence at least, or give a chance to try and influence. So over the past recent, I think 2 or 3 years, more and more consumer product brands have come to us and work with us. So we did some work with Ben & Jerry's, which was great. We did a materiality assessment with them. They wanted to understand, like, are we really listening to our stakeholders? So the people who work inside our ice cream shops, the activists in the UK and other countries, to our customers, to our board, also to the farmers that we work with as well. So we kind of did a listening tour and reported back to them on what was important. And then we've got recent opportunities to work with an eyewear brand, which has been amazing. And really, again, we're helping them do a double materiality assessment. So foundational to strategy. And then another company, being a clothing brand, working with them to advocate for more attention, resources, and support in terms of social compliance, which has been amazing. And then the other one is I've been working with Red Wing Shoe Company over the past, I think like 2 years now, really helping Kim, who leads their CSR program, stand it up from the ground. And what really sold me on that project is their CEO, Allison, who's a 4th generation family member at this company. She took over the CEO position from her dad, and she started as CEO the year we started on the CSR project that we were working on. And she was one of the people who interviewed me, who signed off on QB working for them. She's been at all of our key milestone meetings. So this has been really promising in terms of like checking off our list of who can we work with, because we have the attention of the executive team. We have people, it's a family owned business. Like Red Wing's been around for 100+ years. Like they're down to do this the right way, take their time, make it diligent, and do it well. So it's been just a joy working with them. So yeah, I think it's been really important that we set these high markers, but that was also the benefit of me and Noemi coming and starting our own businesses. We also had the role of like no working with asshole policies. And when you're a small firm, our pipeline is nice and has grown every year, but it certainly is not comparable to people who have operational expenses like actual locations and buildings. So we get to be nice and choosy with who we work with.
Oh, I love that. That's so cool. And it's cool to hear the intention behind what has been a yes along the way and what has been a like, maybe not for us or not right now. I am interrupting this episode of the Women Changing the World podcast really quickly to personally invite you to join the Girls Club Collective. The Girls Club Collective is an intentionally intimate feminine leadership lab for change agents and the personal and professional development community that you've been looking for. Don't just take my word for it, though. While you're submitting your application on our website, girlsclubcollective.co, please be sure to read one of the countless testimonials from our incredible members and alumni. There are so many benefits to being a part of the collective, which is designed around our signature feminine leadership framework. That means you'll have opportunities every month for connection, embodied strategy, visibility, and amplification, and so much more. Don't forget to mention our podcast in the Where Did You Hear About the Cohort section on your application. And now, without further ado, back to the episode. It's so wild that you've been running QB for 7 years. I'm sure there's so many people listening who are either earlier in their entrepreneur journey or have a baby spark or maybe have no interest in ever being entrepreneurs. And I think we're at whichever of those buckets you fit into, like 7 years is a huge milestone. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but I think it's something like at least half of businesses that don't make it past the 5-year mark. And I'm so curious, when you think about the journey, like what are some of the things that have really worked over the past 7 years?
Yeah, it's been a long time. It's been hard. This has been a hard year for sure. I think that also reflects like the time and space of ESG in some way as well. I know like my version of hard isn't too unique from talking to some of my peers. I feel like with a lot of the changing regulation and this impending election, what Kate felt like forever to get to, left a lot of companies feeling uneasy or unclear. So this year's been particularly unique, but kind of like what I see as mile markers for us along, or milestone markers along the way of our QB journey was, I think one part is me and Noemi were just so freaking naive when we started this business in a good way. I had not been a consultant really. For much long, a lot of this has been acting off of my intuition and what I thought, how I thought advising should go and what felt right and how I thought businesses should operate. So kind of telling them to do it that way. But yeah, we met at BSR, which was amazing. We sat across from each other, just, fangirling over each other each day. And I got 3 months of being a sustainability consultant at BSR, which was awesome and the dream job that I thought I wanted. Certainly there was some lessons in culture that I learned there and got to experience and realize like, oh, this isn't necessarily the culture I want to be a part of. And then certainly I see a lot of opportunities for more diversity in terms of sustainability consultants across the space. Noemi experienced that herself as a woman of color and a sustainability consultant over in New York as well. So a lot of that was just us wanting to create a home that we wanted to be a part of and kind of being naive into all the inner workings that did it. So we both just took a big leap together and with our vision of what we could bring to the table. And then one thing that I think definitely always helped us getting started is me and Noemi both worked at Change.org together and we were both in sales. So a lot of consultants do consulting first. And then as you stay at a consulting firm, you get brought into director, partner levels, but you don't really start selling work till later in your career. And you're used to being a project manager and actions and very SME. And so I think one thing that gave us a leg up is we were very comfortable doing cold outreach, doing LinkedIn outreach, email outreach, calling people on the phones. These are the things we had to do at Change.org because we were on the business development team. And so I think that really helped us get over a lot of fears that I see from independent consultants or others launching their new business today until they kind of get that practice under their feet and define their voice. And then one of our first clients, Noemi actually took with her from her former consulting business, which was nice. So, always having that first client fill that first hole is really helpful. And it was S&P. So it was a nice name. We did a very small project with them. It was creating a diversity newsletter a newsletter that was focused on diversity content for their executive team. So we were spending way too many billable hours on finding the right images and making all the right copy and designing this little thing that's going to go out in MailChimp. But it was awesome to be working on something tangible. And then our next client actually came from cold outreach on LinkedIn. And Noemi met with her in Austin. Then we met her up with her in New York because timing worked out right. And she took a risk on us. And then we had a couple other projects in there that were just random. I think in the beginning, you're kind of just throwing anything on the wall and seeing what's stuck. We had theories of what we thought we could do, but we weren't ready to pick, even though we were advised a lot to pick a lane. I was just I don't know what lane yet. We're just going to go with the lane that the market wants us to have. We definitely wanted to do more of inclusive training type of work, workshop-y type of work, but those were not the bids that we were winning at the time. So we definitely let go of that work over time. But yeah, I feel in those first couple of years, it was a lot of putting yourself out there, cold outreach. We were lucky enough to always have a project and never be empty. So it was one client after one client. And then in 2020, Liz, when you started working with us on our first project, was one of the first year we had stacked projects, which was amazing. And it was also the first year that we won our first reporting client. So that was really interesting. Getting people to buy our reporting services, which are now highly sought after reporting services, was actually really difficult because people wanted you to be able to throw down a stack of 30 reports so that you could prove your worth and they could make a safe safe bet. So we definitely lost out to a lot of bids in the beginning until took a chance on us. And they took a chance on us because they had a supplier diversity goal. And we hit their supplier diversity like target and criteria. And so they wanted to do something more creative and a bit more storytelling. So they gave this small firm a chance who didn't have a big stack of reports, but had a lot of good and great big ideas. So that was amazing. And then we had our first report. And I feel like once we had that next like check on the box, the reporting work really started trickling in over time. And then, to everyone thinking about doing this as well, certainly Noemi and I didn't ever imagine ourselves as entrepreneurs. So, don't count yourself short if you aren't thinking about it today. And then, we've always counted ourselves lucky to be co-founders. I think we both would also confidently say it's one of the hardest things we've ever done too. We now find ourselves in 2 marriages. One marriage is like plenty hard and enough as well. But yeah, I think it's a thing to consider too. There's so much of it that's nice in terms of things that Noemi does that she loves that, I'd prefer not to do. There's a nice balance. You're not in it alone. You have someone to be a sounding board with as well. So I think having a co-founder has certainly helped us scale and grow our company, I think, a bit faster over time too. It's taken a lot of flexibility and hard work and trial and error on our parts too.
Absolutely. And also, it sounds like patience. I mean, I think just like the early years of building something like this, it can take a while. And I think when people see where you are now, it can like seem as though this is where you've always been. And knowing that it was years of hard work, of one foot in front of the other, one project after the next, getting on the phone with people, like building that pipeline. It's like inspiring to see what that can become. And also, I know it could be so frustrating when you're first getting started and you're like just ready to be where you are now right away.
Yeah, that's why you bring that up to the point of like, I think, what did you say? Fake it till you can make it kind of sense. Or maybe that was what was in my head, because that's what Noemi always told us. We have to fake it till we can make it. To me, I feel like we were talking a little bit about this in GCC. I'm a GCC member, disclosing this here for the pod, and I absolutely love it. And one of the conversations I think we were having is around like being vulnerable or putting yourself out there as a business owner, and all these pieces. And that's, I think, definitely something we didn't do when we started QB. I wish I had a space like GCC when we started QB, but it's something I've always had a challenge with, because we were trying to present this front of like, we're here, we're already good, we're already perfect, don't have any questions about this, like, don't worry about everything in the background, like, we'll take care of it. We just need you to know and see and believe in the dream that we also believe in as well. But it kind of put me in this funny space in some ways of like people assuming we were bigger than we really were, or we were doing more than we really were, but we kind of needed you to buy into that dream so we could keep growing. And then mostly saying all of this because when we actually got to the point of reality matching the dream we were selling, I kind of felt like I couldn't celebrate it too in some ways, or it was like a little harder because I was like, well, this is where people have always thought we are. Yeah, I don't know, just to be a little more like real in terms of growing the business and doing sales, you're definitely pitching a lot for people to buy into as well. But yeah.
Totally. And it's such a dance, I think, between like, I found too, and I know we've talked about this, it's like when you do have like a beautiful brand and a like really buttoned up or not buttoned up, but like dialed in online presence, I think people often get the impression that you're like further along than you are. So it's always like that delicate balance of like wanting to be real and authentic and transparent. And also, where you're going and you have the vision. But I think holding both of those things to be true at the same time and be able to ask for help when you need it, which is like such a big part of the entrepreneurial journey. It's a lot to hold all at the same time.
Yeah. And massively the piece I'm still learning as well. I feel like as of this year, I think I'm learning to ask for help more too. And kind of, I talked about this earlier in the sense of like, what am I thinking about for my next 7 years? And I think more of that is me asking for help. A lot of like what QB has been me and Noemi doing the work to make the company work. I pay all our contractors, I pay our clients, I'm the invoicing team, the AP team, procurement, kind of like all things ops at QB. And I've been doing that for 7 years. Also a lot of confidence, I guess, in myself. I took one accounting class and was like, I can do this. I can do accounting in QuickBooks. Sure. Definitely had a lot of confidence when I started QB2. And maybe that's one thing I'll throw in here is, and then Liz, I know we talk about this a lot in terms of like building confidence in community. I don't think I could have ever launched QB without having had it happen while I was in grad school at Presidio Graduate School, just being surrounded by other people who were investing in my growth and like maturity and just like understanding of the world and letting me practice and play and fail as well. And I think that confidence is what made me bold enough to say like, yeah, let's do this. And even if it fails, what do I lose? I get a couple more awesome projects that I get to do. And then I, take my shot somewhere else as well. So I think that lack of fear and that confidence that I gained while doing this in grad school was such a blessing. And I think a huge part to why even QB got off the ground in the first place too.
Oh, I love that so much. I think who we surround ourselves with can be so influential on what feels possible. And I love that reflection. Okay, there's so many things I still want to talk to you about. I guess maybe the last work question I want to ask before I want to talk a little bit more about like mothership and leadership before we wrap up is I know you're doing like really, really, really cool work on climate justice and equity, which we haven't touched on yet. And I would love to hear a little bit more about like the work that you're doing in that space that's really inspiring you.
Yeah. This has been some of the work we've gotten to work on more specifically over the past, I think like 3 years now. As I mentioned, our vision at QB was to work towards a world where organizations invest in inclusive and diverse communities or prioritize inclusive and diverse communities and invest in climate resilience. And so much of the first part of QB really focused on that inclusive and diverse community piece. And we did that through our materiality assessments and really advocating and talking to corporations about listening to people when they do their stakeholder engagement that just weren't in their C-suite. Like, let's bring in the new hire. Let's bring in the employee resource group lead. Let's bring in the junior designer. Like, let's listen to people beyond who's already going to say what, or beyond your investors, bring in subject matter expertise as well. So I feel like we've been focusing on that piece. And then we got the amazing opportunity to work really directly in climate resilience. Dylan, one of our now besties, QB fans, I think she would be okay with us saying that. She got an opportunity at Verizon and then called us and was like, okay, we are starting to ask, like, what does climate resilient mean to us as a company? Is climate justice something we can work on? How does a corporation need to show up? And they were looking for a partner to answer that question. We were lucky enough to win that bid. And so for a year, we got to talk to people throughout 5 communities and kind of ask them, like, how are they experiencing climate justice? How are they experiencing climate impacts? What is in their world? What do they want? Really just listening to what the community needs. And we're able to report that back, bring Verizon into these conversations, just do this beautiful climate justice listening tour. We have a white paper called Stakeholder Engagement That Doesn't Suck that really captures that information as well, if anyone wants to check it out. And then over the past 2 years, I've been working really closely with Verizon to ask what can they do with that information. So how can they design climate equity solutions or put their money to work in a way that's informed by the community? So this past year launched Climate Connect. Specifically, we've been focusing in Houston, Texas as a pilot. And we've been bringing different events and workshops to East End and Gulfton communities in Houston based on the information that we received from stakeholders. So this has been anywhere from disaster preparedness planning designed for families in Gulfton and East End to a weatherization workshop tailored for seniors. So we did a senior breakfast and everyone there got to learn together. We heard such great feedback of people appreciating that they were learning about weatherization, how to implement small starter packages of weatherization in their houses with people of their age, people who looked like them. There was a lot less pressure in terms of feeling like they were slowing down the group or they could ask the questions that they wanted. We also did some like climate science camps and a climate mixer and career fair to really show different audiences and students that there's a whole career in climate justice or energy efficiency if they wanted it. This event was kind of in particularly really important to me, or I thought could be a good test. Tom's came and spoke at Mizzou when I was an undergrad, and that was just one of the instances that kind of showed me like, oh, there's a different type of company out there operating differently, or a different alternative career that I could be exploring besides being a journalist or working inside a corporation on their buying team. So I think those experiences we see in undergrad are just so, you're so ready to learn and be open to new things where you're going to school. But yeah, if we're listening to the people who are most impacted, corporations and businesses will be able to design the plans and strategies that we all really need. I'm excited if I were to pick something that's exciting about this new administration world is that maybe there's a good bit of focus on locally. What can we do? What's a hyper local focus you can have in your community to truly make it climate resilience? Disaster resilience is going to become a bit more of our world moving forward. So I think this hyperlocal approach is definitely going to be the way to go moving forward.
I so appreciate that. I feel like that's something I've learned from you. I've learned from Nivea Chanta, who's also been on the podcast. And as part of what inspired me, I recently joined the board of a nonprofit organization called Run on Climate that's really focused on local community climate action and local politicians or local elected officials, getting them into office and supporting them. And so, yes, I am so here for the local climate action. So appreciate you sharing that. Well, and I think it's just so incredible that like you've been doing all of this, like not just the work you just mentioned, but like so many of the things that you've shared with us as a mother of two young boys. And I'm curious, what have you found most helpful as you've been navigating what has been like such a full and specific chapter and moment?
Yeah, being empowered to take the leave that I wanted to take was a game changer. For me, it was a very short leave, so I probably have a different answer, I think, than most. I took 8 weeks of leave, but just being able to make that decision for me felt amazing. I loved being home with my boys, but I also realized like what made me feel whole as a person was coming back to my job and having space in my life and not necessarily being a caretaker and a mom 24/7, which yeah, that was hard being on maternity leave and being this little baby's sole provider of nutrients and sleep and all that jazz and having to take care of myself. It was definitely, it's a constant exercise too of realizing that first year is so hard. I just had my second baby, Nash, last August. So kind of coming off that first year. And I was like, man, this year feels so hard. And I'm like, yeah, it's because like I had a newborn most of this year who wasn't sleeping for 10 months. And I remember 2022 at the end of the year in 22, feeling like my bucket was so empty. So I think part of it is giving us a reminder, even though it's difficult, but to give yourself grace and know like that first year of life of these little babies are so difficult and you can only do so much. And you're really just like changing and evolving as a person too. I feel like it was a really hard identity change in some ways to realize like my day had to end at 5 for sure. Because that's when we're lucky enough to have a nanny. So that's when our kids were done with childcare, but very different than what I was used to, which is like, I can work till 6, 6:30, 7. That's fine. It's fun. Let's do it. But yeah, all of a sudden you have all these hard boundaries. But I feel like being able to embrace flexibility, it makes you really great at prioritization in some ways. Definitely like having my mom chats have been really helpful, and other people who have been moms to commiserate in has been nice. But having dependable childcare has been the biggest game changer. And I couldn't do this without my first son was in like a nanny share for after he was 8 weeks old till about a year and a half. And then we moved to Burlingame, and now him and my youngest are in a nanny. And I definitely couldn't do what I'm doing today without my nanny, Maria, who watches our boys from 8 to 5 every day. So definitely having dependent childcare is huge. And the days that they would be sick and I would have to still work, or anytime I find myself multitasking when I should be making them dinner without, like, I was doing this the other night. I was trying to wrap up a quick email because my husband was getting home later than he was supposed to. It was chaotic. He finally got home. I was pissed at him for no reason, really, except that I was all frustrated and flustered from trying to write an email and feed my kids. And it's just a constant reminder of, like, it is so hard to do both. So big hugs to parents out there who are, like, constantly doing both and navigating both, because that type of multitasking just drains you as well. But I feel like it's something me and Noemi will always be proud of. We started QB in 2017. It's 2024 now, and she's had 2 babies. I've had 2 babies as well. We have some of our teammates this year or next year who are going to be bringing more little babies into the world as well. So it's been a cool thing to build something that's so inviting to parents. And I know that was definitely, like, for me, an important piece, for Noemi, a hugely important piece, which was like, let's create a work culture that is a place that moms can show up in and work how they want to work and be the mom and family member that they want to be as well, too.
It's so cool. I love that vision that you have held. And I also think it's been so cool to watch different people, like, be part of different moments in their motherhood journeys and be part of that culture. It's so inspiring. Well, I could talk to you forever. I know we're coming up on time. The last thing I wanted to ask you about before we wrap up is really about the idea of leadership, which is a big concept we've been talking a lot about on the podcast this year. And I feel so lucky that you've been part of GCC over the past almost 2 years, which is crazy. And I really admired, like, how much you've leaned in and helped shape our space, which is itself like a form of leadership. But I'm curious, when you think about, like, the word and the concept of leadership, what does leadership mean to you right now?
Yeah. When you're saying that, the first thing that popped in my mind was vulnerability. And I say that at the same time where I know it's really hard for me to be vulnerable. I'm very much a, like, worker and a giver. As a side note too, I just did my astrology 101 with one of our other GCC members, Kelly. And she was like, whew, you give and you give and you give. Are you okay? And I was like, I'm not okay right now. This has been a hard year. But I think part of that is I often just kind of want to work and do and not necessarily be vulnerable. But I think so much of being a good leader is to show up and be able to be vulnerable, because then that creates space for others. And then I think the other counter to that, to me, is accountability. How are you accountable to your word? How are you accountable to your teammates? And, with all that then comes in, like, really good communication. But I think there's a lot for leaders can get right if they focus on being vulnerable and accountable.
What a potent pairing. I really love that so much. Thank you so much for sharing. I feel like some of the, like, definitions and wisdom drops we've had on this question in particular lately really have my wheels turning in such a fun way. Well, thank you so much for sharing that, Sam. Thank you so much for being here. Again, I'm just, like, so honored. I appreciate you so much. I love collaborating with you so much in all the ways. For people who are listening who are like, I need more Sam in my life, where is the best place, or are the best places for people to find you, to follow you, and to keep up with you?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, Sam Hartsock, QB Consulting. You can follow me on Instagram. It's going to be a lot of pictures probably of, like, my children and dogs, and then occasionally me doing fun climate resilient event stuff. But that's at Sam Lee Hartsock. My email is sam@consultqb.com. I'm all here for kind of walk and talks. It's something I'm trying to embrace more of next year. So I spend less time sitting at this desk that I'm sitting at now, which was a lot of 2024, and a bit more kind of, like, off screen, getting back to that good phone use as well too, is one of my intentions for next year.
Oh, I love it. We'll be sure to include links to all the things in the show notes. Thank you again so much, Sam. I appreciate you so much, and this has been so much fun.
Thank you, Liz. Totally appreciate you too.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the Women Changing the World podcast. Please rate and review the podcast wherever you're currently listening to it, and don't forget to subscribe for future episodes. You can find me on Instagram at liz.best, that's lis.best, and you can find Girls Club Collective at girls_club_collective. You can also find us on LinkedIn by searching for Liz Best, that's my name, LISBEST, and Girls Club Collective. Join our mail list by visiting the Girls Club Collective homepage and scrolling down to the bottom. You'll be in the loop on upcoming events, retreats, and opportunities to make magic with us, and you'll also receive a monthly love note from my heart to your inbox. I am so excited to keep in touch.